On a quiet day in a small suburban park, a group of teenagers gathered near the playground. Their laughter echoed in the space, but it was not innocent laughter. These boys, full of courage and misplaced confidence, spent the summer finding joy in seducing and tormenting others, especially those they considered easy targets. Today, their sights were on an elderly black man sitting calmly in a nearby chair, intently reading an old book. The man's name was Gabe, dressed simply in a shirt, faded jeans, and an old hat pulled low on his face. To those boys, he looked like a cute target. They looked at each other, smirked, clearly making up their minds. One of them, a tall young man with a cocky gait, nudged his friend and said, "Look at that old man. Bet he can't walk straight, let alone defend himself. Sometimes we don't even know what's going on." The group of teenagers laughed loudly, then added some sarcastic comments. They approached Gabe, surrounding him like a flock of birds exploring their prey. The man barely noticed their presence at first, or perhaps his eyes were still focused on his book. Gabe was completely undisturbed by the noise around him. With a sarcastic tone, a boy in the group approached and said, "Old man, what are you reading? Or do you know how to read?" Another boy smiled and followed, "That's right, you shouldn't be here. Why don't you go play somewhere else?" The words were provocative, but Gabe remained silent, just gently turning the pages of the book. His calm attitude only made the young men more aggressive. "Don't ignore us, old man. Do you think you're more noble than us?" One of them, named Rick, stepped closer, puffed out his chest, clenched his fists, appearing strong and aggressive. Gabe remained silent, his calm demeanor as if he didn't even notice the children's existence, which made them even angrier. One boy in the group, perhaps the boldest, stood straight in front of Gabe, blocking his view, while the others watched silently. "What's wrong, old man? Do you think you're better than us?" The young man spoke, his voice hollow. "Why don't you answer us? You're disrespecting us." There was no need to wait any longer. The young man raised his hand as if to attack Gabe, but before the boy could reach, Gabe's hand shot up like lightning, grabbing the young man's neck with surprising strength, keeping his arm suspended, unable to move. The remaining young men stood silently, the arrogant smiles on their faces gradually fading as their awareness of the situation began to subside. Gabe slowly raised his face, his eyes locked on the group of young men. His expression was calm but determined, without any anger, just a majestic look that made the young man's heart skip a beat in fear. At that moment, an elderly man walking his dog nearby was about to stop. His eyes widened when he recognized Gabe. His heart must have skipped a beat as old memories rushed back. Without thinking further, he blew closer, breaking the tense atmosphere. "Wait," the older man shouted and clapped his hands to attract the attention of the group of young men. The boys turned to look at him with confused and worried eyes while the young man's arm was still tightly held by Gabe. "This is Mr. Gabe there," the older man continued, his voice filled with awe and respect. "He is a master martial artist, one of the best. I was taught by him many years ago. He is a karate champion, can defeat all of you in seconds if he wants." The group of young men looked at each other, and one of them spoke up. "We've changed a lot since that day, and you taught us something we didn't even know we needed to learn. We just wanted to say thank you for that." Gabe still held the young man's wrist, looking at him with a small, knowing smile. "I don't know," he finally said softly, then slowly released his grip. "That's the problem. You guys acted without thinking, without understanding." Still in shock, their original group of brave, slow-moving young men has now completely disappeared. Courage the moment they first arrived was replaced by a feeling of sadness about the mistake they had just made. They realized they had chosen an unwinnable battle, but what was worse was that they had taken action in ignorance and hubris. Silence filled the air. Tense, Gabe remained calm, present as usual. He could have easily defended himself, but instead Gabe spoke in a deep yet powerful voice. "I didn't answer you because that wouldn't solve anything. Perhaps it would only hurt you, but it would teach you something. He looked at each person in the group of young men, his eyes calm and determined. You see, strength isn't about causing trouble, it's about knowing when not to use it. Strength is about protecting and guiding. I could have taught you an unforgettable lesson by punching, but that's not the lesson you need. The group of young men remained silent. No one said another word, but Gabe's every word changed the tense atmosphere, replacing it with a heavy and deep feeling as the boys began to think about his actions. There was guilt, shame, and an undeniable humility among the youth group. Gabe paused for a moment, giving his words time to sink into their minds before continuing. You guys think this is fun, right? Choosing to hurt people you think are weaker than you, but you don't know their story, who they are, or what they've done, ever experienced. He gently looked at the boy who had tried to attack him, his eyes softening. You guys are still young, you still have time to change. But if you keep living with jealousy in your heart, it will only hurt you in the end. The boy responded, slowly nodding in silence. The older man, who had recognized Gabe from before, stepped closer, shaking his head as if he couldn't believe his eyes. You don't know how lucky you are that he didn't react the way you expected. Gabe is not just a warrior. He is a man of honor, of moral character, a man who believes in education, not punishment. Gabe turned to the older man, nodded respectfully, then looked back at the group of young men, his eyes full of meaning, as if leaving them a lesson. Gabe looked at the group of young men and said, "You guys are young, like I said, and I'm willing to forgive you. But you guys need to learn from this job. Don't judge people by their appearance alone, their skin color. Take the time to understand them. Everyone has a story, and you will never know it if you don't open your eyes in love." The young men, humble in a way they did not expect, finally opened their mouths. One boy, his voice trembling, said, "We're sorry, we didn't know." Gabe smiled gently, his eyes became even gentler. Yes, that's the thing about life. You can't know everything, but you can choose to treat others. And it's how you choose that makes the difference. With that, Gabe turned around and picked up his book, peacefully sitting on the park bench again. But the group of young people will never look at him the same way. They came looking for a character, but instead met a teacher. And this lesson of respect, humility, and the meaninglessness of hatred will stay with them for the rest of their lives. As the group of young men walked away, the older man noticed Gabe gently rubbing their shoulders, saying, "You guys learned an important lesson today, don't forget it." The young men nodded, still in shock from their recent experience. They began by attracting a stranger, but received a profound lesson in humility that they will never forget. Gabe returned to his book, a gentle smile on his face. He always believed in teaching with kindness and not with violence. Today was no exception. As the sun began to set over the park, Gabe knew that the seeds of change had been planted in the hearts of those young men. 5 weeks have passed since that fateful afternoon in the park, and the young men, once shown to be dangerous and youthfully extravagant, have changed in ways they never imagined. The encounter with Gabe left a profound mark on their lives. The young men now see the world through a different perspective, understanding the value of respect and humility. The days of instability and indifference have now given way to a sense of responsibility for their actions, which is reflected in the way they treat people. One afternoon, a group of young people happened to return to the park, walking on a familiar path. But their conversation is different now more mature and thoughtful. As they approached the bench where Gabe had sat a few weeks ago, they were surprised to see that he was still there, as peaceful as before, with the same old book in his hand. This time, instead of carrying complacency and a desire to prove something, the group of young men approached Gabe with respect and gratitude. One of them, the boy who was at war with Gabe every moment, stepped forward, his tone humble and sincere. "Mr. Gabe, we didn't expect to see you here again, but we're really happy about it." Gabe looked up from his book, a warm smile spreading across his face as he recognized the group of young men. He gently put the book down next to them and looked straight into their eyes, nodding in welcome. "I miss you guys," he said, his voice calm and wise. "How are you guys?" Gabe looked up from his book, a warm smile spreading across his face as he recognized the group of young men. He gently put the book down next to them and looked straight into their eyes, nodding in welcome. "I miss you guys," he said, his voice calm and wise. "How are you guys?" Gabe's smile deepened. His eyes remained as calm as ever. "I'm glad to hear that," he replied. Sometimes life gives you the opportunity to see things from a different perspective. And what matters is what you choose to do with that opportunity. The boys nodded, and one of them somewhat hesitantly spoke up. "We talked a lot about what you said that day, about strength and wisdom, and we wondered if you show us a little bit about what you know, what has helped you become the person you are today." Gabe looked at them for a moment, thoughtful, his eyes studying each face. Clearly, this time they weren't asking out of courage or current desire, but out of a sincere curiosity, a desire to learn something truly meaningful. "I'm not the coach anymore," Gabe said softly. "I have retreated from all that. Now I only seek peace. But I can show you a little, just enough to help you understand what true strength is. Remember, what I teach you is not for fighting or hurting others. It is for discipline, for control, and for understanding yourself. Never take advantage of what I teach." The group nodded in agreement. He slowly stood up, each movement slow and comfortable, then led the young men to a small grassy area nearby, away from the benches and the rest of the park. There he demonstrated some basic movements, defensive strokes, posture, and calm breathing techniques. Gabe's movements are precise and smooth like natural water flows. The group of young people watched, eyes wide open, attentively absorbing every detail of the performance. The boys stood there, looking in amazement, and trying to imitate Gabe's every move, even though they understood that their level was far from reaching his dexterity. Gabe laughed at their efforts and said, "It's not how fast or strong you are. It's how much control you have over your strength, your mind, and your body. Lack of control only leads to danger. Do it. Please always remember that." The boys practice a few basic moves, but they realize they have only glimpsed something much deeper. Gabe's movements are not only combination, but also the embodiment of wisdom, discipline, and understanding accumulated over many years. They felt honored to learn even a small part of him. After a few minutes, Gabe stopped, his hand signaling the end of the random lesson. "That's enough for now," he said with a smile. "Like I said, I have retired and am no longer a teacher. But you have learned enough to begin to understand what real power is. And remember, never use what you learn to deeply hurt." The boys nodded, their faces lit up, filled with respect and gratitude. They felt truly blessed and appreciated these valuable lessons. Through the short training session, the boys really received real strength, not only physically, but also the ability to control themselves and build character. "Thank you, Gabe," one of the boys said in a sincere voice. "We will never forget what you taught me, both today and before." Gabe's face warmed and he knocked his head. "Very well. Now walk away and remember that life is a journey of learning and growing. You have the power to change, and I believe you will." The boys said goodbye to Gabe, their hearts beating more gently, their minds filled with valuable lessons. As they walked away, they felt they had received something far more valuable than fighting techniques, a path to becoming better men. As time passed, the boys began to live by the lessons Gabe taught them. They become more thoughtful, kind, and self-aware. The bravery and habits that they had previously kept like armor gradually disappeared, replaced by a deep understanding of the true meaning of the power of love and respect for everyone. As for Gabe, he returned to his peaceful life, sitting in a familiar park, enjoying peaceful days, knowing that the seeds of change he had sown in the hearts of the boys would continue, develop in them. And as dusk fell over the park that afternoon, Gabe knew that the seeds of change had been planted and were growing in the hearts of those boys just as they had grown in as many years ago before.